There we go. Recording is started. Thank you. Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm calling this meeting of the Public Safety Communications Task Force to order. It is 11:16 on September 24th, 2025, and I'm Barbara Neal. The meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be posted to the task force webpage following the meeting. Let's start with a roll call of task force members. Please verbally acknowledge your presence when I call your name. Dan Batesy.
Here.
Ron Kumitz.
Present.
Morning. Jim Mack.
Here.
Right. And that looks to be it so far. I know Paul is a maybe to join. He would be joining by phone. Michael Wright is also a maybe. And I see Mike Dunges has just joined us. Good morning, Mike. Can you acknowledge your presence?
Good morning. I'm always 1 minute late.
Yeah. No, we're good. We're good. Okay. So also joining us, we have Emily Mullaney as our administrative support, and our project management partners, Rick and Elizabeth, today from Televate. So Dom will not be joining us this morning. Looks like no one here today from Mission Critical. And I see Chris Pedotti from Department of Public Safety has joined us. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning, Barb. Good morning, everyone.
Morning. Right. So let's move on to approval of the agenda. The agenda was distributed to task force members. It's also available on the webpage. Any changes needed to the agenda? Okay. Hearing nothing, we'll consider it approved and move on to approval of the minutes. These would be the minutes from the September 10th meeting, regular meeting number 59. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
I will second that.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Ron. Any discussion or any changes needed to those minutes? All right. All in favor of approving the minutes from September 10th, raise your hand or indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Hands up, and an aye from Ron. So the minutes are approved. And Rick, I'm going to hand it over to you for the project updates.
Thank you, Barb. I've got some tall shoes to fill today with Dom out, but I'll do my best to fill in for him. So if I falter, just slap me. All right, I'm going to share a presentation so that it's what we've achieved is visible to everyone. So let's. Okay, let me know when you can see my screen.
There we can now.
Is it visible? Should I go into presentation mode or is this good enough?
I think this is fine, but whatever your preference is.
All right. Okay, so let me, basically today's agenda is going to be, provide a status report overview of what we've accomplished over the September 8th to September 19th time frame. And as in following the agenda, we are also going to make some additional presentations. So with that said, let me just get into the status report. So as usual, we've had a busy couple of weeks. Congratulations to everybody who's been participating. We've as a result of our last task force meeting. During that meeting, we made presentations or recommendations from the Tier 2 and Tier 3 working groups to the full task force, and in response to that meeting, we've also made a few adjustments that we can present a little later in the meeting to that initial set of recommendations. We've also held during that time frame 2 additional meetings with the governance working group, and just this week we held the final meeting with the working group as the plan activities for September 22nd show. So the governance working group has had a couple of weeks for certain. As I mentioned earlier, we've updated the Tier 2 and Tier 3 working group recommendations, and we'll present them shortly. We also developed and proposed a fire dispatch a VHF simulcast cell configuration and was also reviewed by the Tier 2 working group members and was updated accordingly. We continue to advance action items for each of the working groups so that we're sure we have a comprehensive set of information from the stakeholders to and inputs to advance each of the working groups' recommendations. Also, during that time frame, task force chairs held a meeting with the Vermont Joint Fiscal Committee to provide project status and also receive some guidance that I'm assuming Barbie might talk about earlier regarding our schedule to present information to the legislature.
Yeah, I can I can chime in with that now if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. Please do.
Okay. We did meet with Joint Fiscal, and Rick and Dom had helped us put together a thorough presentation that I felt satisfied them as far as understanding the work that was required in Act 78, what we have done, what's in progress, and where the information can be found, either in the system planning report from Mission Critical, in the inventory and assessment report from Mission Critical, or outside of those two reports. So they seem to appreciate the thoroughness of that. They did advise that they are hoping to have recommendations from us earlier in December than we were planning. So we're going to have to come up with a mechanism for getting that information over to them sooner rather than later. And I don't know that we've made, I don't think we've made any specific decisions on how to accomplish that yet. Have we, Rick?
I know it should be, if it's not an agenda item for today, it should be an item that we need to discuss together. Because yes, we've been, obviously the material that we're assembling from each of the working groups and presenting to the task force will be compiled in such a way that it can, that it'll support a formal presentation to the legislature. But if we need to decide if we need a report, what content, is anything secure, needs to be redacted, whatever that is. But yeah, I mean, the materials that we're going to present needs to be determined so that we can, along the way, we can, prepare it and not wait till the last minute to get the job done.
Okay, we will, let's put that on the agenda for next meeting. And maybe we can come up with some ideas in the meantime.
Makes sense.
Okay.
All right, let me get back to the.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, it's perfect. It needs to be done. Again, meeting notes and meeting recordings for all working group meetings have been distributed and posted. And in discussion with the working groups, and for those working groups that have not yet met, have their kickoff meeting, we've had to adjust the schedule in order to accommodate that. Based on next week's meeting, we may have to reassess our schedule, but we're ready to get going on the next working groups. And now that a number of you have been on 2 or 3 working groups, and the next one to start, what I think would be a third for Barb. So we're ready to keep rolling. And let's see, for what we have planned for this week, a meeting of the governance working group was held, so that's already been finished. We're going to conduct a meeting with the tier working group is being scheduled, and additional working group meetings will be scheduled accordingly. So that is an overview of project status over the last couple of weeks.
Okay, great. I see Phil Sisk has joined us from Mission Critical.
Phil, near the suspected shooter contain messages that are
I think we've got to mute
nature.
a mic somewhere.
But yeah, this
There
is just the most recent example.
There we go. I think we're good now. Phil, do you have anything to add from Mission Critical as far as updates, or are you just tuning in to see where we're out with the work?
Here to listen and observe. I did not have an update passed on to me by Jason or Bonnie.
Just
Okay.
wanted to observe what progress is being made. Say good morning, hello.
All right. Good morning and hello. Okay, Rick, I think we're going to go back to you to review the edits to the tier 2 and 3 recommendations.
Okay, we're gonna do that first. All right, sure. All right, let me pull my presentation back up. Okay, everyone can see my screen again? Yes?
Yes.
All right, so as I mentioned earlier, as part of what we've been accomplishing over the past couple of weeks, and again, I'm glad Phil is here. We continue to rely on and get support from mission critical partners as needed. So thank you for that, Phil, and thank you for the team. When we presented the tier 2 and tier 3 working group recommendations, preliminary recommendations to the task force, there were, there was good discussion, and the task force requested some modifications, enhancements, and so further clarification on some of these items. So what we've done here is we have the highlighted, the ones in the green were the recommended and supported by the task force. So there was no changes made to that presentation, if not noted. So these items were the preferred options, and as we went through, here's the comments over here according to that. So the first modification was based on digital logging recorder standards, and again, there was a agreement that options 2 and 3 made sense, and so the input from the task force must be either option 2 or 3. Standards must be adopted by rule or required by statute. And so that was this area in blue was the addition to that. And certainly, the comment here was this is part of governance work, and potential, it requires a potential dispatch investment. So in blue is what the modification was. Core data transfer and telephone, I mean, option 1 was the one preferred, and on the short term, broader use of rapid SOS, long term include requirements in the CAD RFP. And there was a discussion and recommendation that the cost of the rapid SOS licenses for all dispatch PSAPs and dispatch centers should be a consideration of a recommendation from to the legislature. Regarding GIS and mapping integration enhancement, again, options 1, preference for option 1, short-term transition option 2, statewide CAD with more robust mapping capability. And again, cost, rapid SOS license cost part of the CAD. And we don't yet know the cost of the rapid SOS licenses, but once known, then we would make that part of a recommendation to the legislature. So that's it on the tier. Oh, there's one more. I'm sorry. Yes. So this is the final item here, LMR infrastructure improvement. And basically what we captured was there is a preference for a system of systems approach while considering existing mutual aid groups and common dispatch areas while taking into account current systems and expansion plans and maintaining common design and coverage standards and interoperability requirements throughout the state. And so this is the new language as requested by the task force for this particular item. This is some zones that were, this is a mapping proposed dispatch simulcast cells, and we still haven't finalized this, but this was part of the mapping exercise. We looked at it at containment areas for a potential fire EMS simulcast dispatch concept proposal. Any questions on tier 2? If not, I'll jump right into tier 3 working group updates. All right, same approach. Went through the options offered by MCP in their system planning report, and standard quality assurance. Option 1 was preferred. Need to augment option 1 to establish and adopt by rule a common QA statewide policy via governance subcommittee. So that was the recommendations regarding QA as requested by the task force. Regarding policies and procedures, a preference for option 2 for dispatch to establish and adopt by rule a minimum set of policies and procedures to be followed. Call taking already exists. So again, part of the cost would be part of the governance subcommittee work. And protocols, again, here, preference for option 2 with state and local collaboration to establish and adopt by rule a minimum set of protocols, recognizing the existing call-taking protocols. And nothing on planning or recruiting and hiring, no changes there. And on this final one, standardized training for new hires and current employees. The task force was preference for option 2, transitioning to option 3, required certification as soon as possible. Coordinate with policies and procedures work and pursue reclassification. Any questions on those? Any items you want to further discuss?
Yeah, I just have a really quick question. So when we talk about requiring certification, are we talking about adopting a certification that exists already, like a national certification, or are we talking about creating a state certification where it's almost people use certification and licensure in two different, oftentimes confused ways. I'm just wondering who's certifying these folks.
So that's a good question, but I think that part of that, the way we looked at it was that would be part of the governance subcommittee work to develop with the dispatch center support. So option 2 was create a list of approved training programs for new hires and for professional development for each communication center to choose from. And there are a number of national standards and recommendations from APCO and NENA. And some of them we've already adopted for 911. The E911 board has adopted, and that some in the dispatch community already, they already recommend and use. And then transferring to option 3 was develop a statewide certification program for all job classifications. So what we're saying is that we need to develop those certification requirements and then ensure that we provide support to the dispatch centers and to dispatchers to achieve those objectives. I don't know if that answers your question, but we'd have to create it, and we could leverage existing national recommendations and best practices, and we could supplement that with the unique requirements and unique to Vermont itself.
Yeah, that answers my question. I mean, I don't necessarily need a specific answer other than that we're thinking about it.
Right, and that's how it works with the 911 board. So all of the call takers in Vermont are required to go through the board's 40-hour certification course, which is built based on those national standards that Rick just mentioned, and includes a component emergency medical dispatch from APCO's program. So the call takers are certified in EMD by APCO and certified as Vermont 911 call takers by the board. So they could really take their APCO EMD and go work elsewhere if that if that agency recognize the APCO EMD program. So there's components of both. I think we're set, Rick.
All right, I'll stop sharing and we'll transition.
Whoops, sorry, I'm gonna get my agenda back up here. Okay, so any questions, any more discussion for tier 2, tier 3 recommendations, or are we good, task force? I'm hesitating a little bit on the various places where we mentioned to do this or that by rule. Rulemaking is a lengthy process, and it's not quick. So we would have to be mindful that the rulemaking set very high overarching requirements, but allowed flexibility in how those things are implemented, right, or changed over time. So anyway, it was just a note when I saw all the references to rulemaking.
I think also, Barbara, we'll discuss during the governance recommendations. That the goal really was to have the board, the future Public Safety Communications Executive Board, have authorization to create practices, and perhaps if there's an overarching there, if the board recommends it and requires it, then perhaps that's good enough. But yes, there is how to best achieve it is something that has to be determined.
Right. Okay. Do we want to move now into the governance recommendations that we have?
Sure. If everybody's ready, let's go for it.
Yeah, I think there are a few things that are still outstanding, but I think let's let everybody know where we are at the moment.
All right. Again, I'll draw up the presentation. Okay. All right. Has everyone seen the screen?
Yes.
I am really excited to be able to present this hard work that was done by the working group, and I'll give you goal is to give you an overview of the process that we undertook, and the recommendations, and a lot of work has been developed in order to, as you'll see, even a recommendation for a executive board structure and approach. And before getting into that, I wanted to bring everyone's attention to exactly what's stated in Act 78 regarding governance. So this is language at item H, and the requirement of the task force was to recommend a governance model to ensure effective state and regional oversight, management, and continuous improvements of the system, including identification of staffing or operational needs to support such oversight and management of the system. So there is direct responsibility provided to the task force to provide a recommendation on a governance model. And so our work is really the work of this working group has been in direct alignment with that requirement. And so without further ado, let me jump into it. So I really like to I want to take an opportunity before we got into the recommendations for those of you who are not familiar with the interoperability continuum. The interoperability continuum is a set of best practices guidelines for public safety to identify where we stand, we are currently at, and how. And what milestones to achieve the most advanced interoperability for public safety communications. And the continuum is anchored on 5 tenets. So it was developed by SAFECOM, this interoperability continuum. And SAFECOM, really represents SAFECOM was created right after 9/11 at the issues that were identified regarding the lack of interoperability of public safety at various agencies, internal to jurisdictions and between jurisdictions. So this, a lot of work has been spent on this since 9/11, and SAFECOM continues to provide guidance on methods to improve emergency response at the interjurisdictional and interdisciplinary level, across over all disciplines. And so the goal here really is the 5 tenets are governance, standard operating procedures, technologies, training and exercises, and usage. And so the task force has been primarily focused, we've been focused on a number of these, governance and technology. But as you look at governance, it was always recommended that governance is kind of the foundation of achieving an ideal environment where our systems support our needs. And so as we look at governance as the foundation, it starts at the simplest level, individual agencies working independently. And this happens every day throughout the state at local and state level. So this is kind of the most fundamental. And then informal coordination between agencies. This goes on with mutual aid agreements. That happens again, is in place throughout the state. And between jurisdictions, and it's more informal than formal, although the mutual aid agreements tend to be documented. And the next step in the process is key multidiscipline staff collaboration on a regular basis. So this, advances sharing of staffing and providing, again, more advanced mutual aid across agencies, both intra and inter response. And the ultimate, situation is a regional committee working within a statewide communication interoperable plan framework. And this is really where the governance working group has been focusing its effort. Achieving this is going to is more in line with this requirement from Act 78. So our focus really has been here, and kind of I don't know, I have this particular graphic on my wall all the time. So I look at it and say, well, where do we stand relative to where we'd like to be? All right. So with that said, let me go into any questions on this before I go on. All right, so let me give you an overview of what the Public Safety Governance Working Group has doing. What's our approach? So the Governance Working Group task force members were Barb Neal, Paul White, and Mike Dunges. And we, over the course of putting these preliminary recommendations together, we had eight meetings beginning in July 9th, and again, just finishing the final meeting this week on Monday. So we are hot off the presses with these recommendations, and supporting this effort. The approach was to review the MCP planning report, public safety governance models and options. And so the report provided a variety of different options and best practices, and we relied on that to guide the effort. We also solicited, plenty of stakeholder engagement along the way, that we got good insight from that stakeholder community. We investigated multiple state and local governance models, including what was in the report, but also we went and did some independent research on other state models, to gain, to better understand what the best practices are, and to just be sure that we had assessed a more robust landscape of potential models to develop the recommendations, preliminary recommendations that we'll review shortly. We also investigated multiple Vermont governance models. Beginning with the Vermont Emergency Communication Advisory Council, We looked at what their work was and who was on their executive board and what their objectives were. We also looked at the Vermont Public Schools. They have a robust governance model, and we looked at it for ideas and inputs. And we also looked at the Vermont Emergency Medical Service Advisory Committee. They have a robust governance model and executive board structure. So we also investigated that. And we gave consideration, the working group gave consideration to leveraging an existing governance structure to possibly share the existing administrative organizational requirements and expenses. So, and the goal was really to do a comprehensive review of what best practices exist, what both nationally and within Vermont, so that we could, so that recommendations could be made that were based on a thorough assessment of our options and other experiences. Any questions so far? All right, so let's, the foundation here, what are the key attributes of the public safety? Let me just correct that spelling there. Okay, so key attributes here. So the recommendation was that the executive board should operate as an independent entity. It should have, similar to the Enhanced 911 board and other boards, it should be an independent entity. It composed of an executive board, focus committees, and board appointed and regional subcommittee members. So you'll see in the next slide the proposed recommendation for that. The goal is for the governance body to have decision-making authority based on the regional structure of PSAPs and regional communication centers. And instead of saying dispatch centers, Paul White, in one of our meetings, said, regional communication centers, and that label kind of stuck to the team. So I capture it here because we just kind of like that reference. Instead of a dispatch center or a communication center, come up with the idea of our existing dispatch centers, calling them regional communication centers. All right, so there's got to be an annual administrative funding and authority to hire staff and enter into agreements. Leave the E911 board intact. So we're not replacing any board. We're actually going, the goal was to leverage the best of the best that we have out there in a public safety communication system environment. We also need a top-level board to approve minimum and technical operational standards, minimum staffing, training, and certification requirements. And this goes back to a comment that Dan made relative to the Tier 2 operating certification requirements. So this would goal is that for this to come out of the board. We also want a permanent seat on the executive board for the Vermont Emergency Dispatch Association. That association, which is created by the dispatch community, just launched this year, and they, because of their role and key contributions and being a hub or a spoke on the wheel, the working group felt that they needed to have a seat on the executive board. Certainly have regional representation from the subcommittees. We want to ensure that the governance board and the approach reflects the diverse communities that we work in, rural and urban and state and local, and include the key contributors to public safety. And, to always seek ongoing feedback from municipalities and organizations to ensure that the initiatives that are developed and the approach to achieving those initiatives always have input from local municipalities and public safety organizations and associations. So anchored on these key attributes, I'm happy to go into the rest. Of any comments here, recommendations to enhance, to improve, to add? Any comments from?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So if this board has decision-making authority over PSAPs and regional communication centers, why is the E911 board not redundant?
I think that's a fair question. I think leaving the 911 board intact protects a functioning system, right? That's been in place for a long time as this initial work is going on the dispatch function. At some point they may come together, and they certainly have to work together, right, to ensure the system is working properly or better. So
what would happen if this board said 911, we want you to do something, and 911 board said, go pound sand, I'm not doing it?
right. Yep. Equally good question. And what if this entity said, Department of Public Safety, we want you to go do something, and DPS said pound sand? So
Well,
I'm not.
I mean, so
Wait.
I think that's a good question too. I think the notion though is that and I'm not necessarily trying to lobby one direction or another here. I'm just trying to understand the overplay. If this entity is the decision-making capability over PSAPs, that would suggest to me that DPS no longer has authority over its PSAPs. I think you're going to have to define what that authority is, right? So how does that impact DPS? So, for example, who do the dispatchers work for in a state police PSAP?
I think just the same as I work for Shelburne right now as a PSAP call taker. I answer certain standards to 911 board. I would have to answer to this dispatch board for certain other issues.
It seems redundant to me. I understand where you're saying.
I answer to DPS as it relates to NCIC requirements. I relate to 911 board through 911 call taking standards. I'm answering to multiple people as it is now. I don't see necessarily any issue with that. I think that ultimately, I would think you'd want to see your 911 board and your dispatch board rolled into one.
That's where my head goes.
Well, I agree.
I
I think that it like all goes back to that whole like too many cooks in the kitchen thing. Like if everybody's trying to figure out where they're going to take their direction from, they're not really going to get much direction.
Yeah. I also think that there is a limited pool of people to participate in these boards. I would imagine if you envisioned who's going to sit on this board and then compared it to who sits on the 911 board, there would be at least a substantial overlap. And the more we sort of pull them in that pool of people in different directions, the weaker our capability to contribute will be.
So Dan, I will share with you that this conversation that we're having here, it was discussed in a number of meetings, and what are the differences? In fact, as that one slide, one line item that I said earlier, let me get back to my this item here, consideration of leveraging existing governance structure, was part of that conversation. I mean, can we could we leverage an existing structure, both to reduce some of our administrative requirements and expenses. We didn't go into the level of depth of some of the questions you just brought up. However, there was conversation on that, and I think this is a good time for the task force to further discuss.
What else?
Well, perhaps we should look at some of what we put together, Dan, because there's a couple more
Okay.
slides there that I think it's going to stir additional conversation of value to the effort. All right, so with this in mind, this was the proposed governance structure from an organizational viewpoint. So there will be a statewide public safety communication governance body. This would be an executive body, and they would have a dotted line relationship with the E911 board. And so, this relationship here wasn't, discussed often. And so, this is because we have an existing 911 board that is responsible for, as you brought up, certain elements of the overall network. We're going to call it a system approach. So underneath this board would be a finance, an advisory and a steering group. So these would advise the board and investigate perhaps an initiative. What is the cost? What are the benefits? Do cost benefit analysis here, and then a steering committee. And there was conversation about the steering committee could be composed of some of the members of the task force. And then within that, we'd have within the committees, there would be a land mobile radio committee, a broadband committee, a cybersecurity committee, an operations committee, and a training committee. And these folks would, work in collaboration with the board to do the work. And these boards, these committees would be composed of key members of the community from rural and state and urban and state and local communities, so that we would have a good diverse cross section of our public safety disciplines and members of the respective geographic communities. And there would be, local. I mean, we haven't decided on how many local, but there will be local, regional, and state participants at all levels of the process to ensure that their input and their needs are represented at all times. And then an ongoing question was, what action is recommended to establish the structure? And so, the working group recommendation was legislative action is preferred to authorize the board and the structure of it, and the intent. Any discussion on this recommendation? All right, so let's look
I have questions, but I was going to wait and ask them once you've sort of gotten all through the rest of it. I think you may answer some of them in the coming slides.
So let's just see what the recommendation. This is a draft governance board composition. So as we looked at, and have quite a bit of discussion on who should be on this board, and as you pointed out earlier, Dan. Yes, there are members of this board that are already on other boards, but this is a unique board that represents the recommendation of including key public safety agencies and associations, state and local, that are engaged in public safety and can support. That are using the systems that we're working with and on, and are good end users and good contributors too. So the working group recommendation was the Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety or designee, and there's designee for all these, so I won't go ahead and mention designee as we go through, but designee is obviously a fundamental of a board. So the executive director of the Enhanced 911 Board, the secretary of the Agency of Digital Services, the secretary of the Agency of Transportation, the commissioner of the Public Safety Department, Public Services Department, executive director of the Community Broadband Board, representatives from the Vermont Emergency Dispatch Association, a representative from a regional PSAP, a representative appointed by the Vermont State Firefighters Association, a representative appointed by the Fire Chiefs Association, a representative appointed by the Chiefs of Police Association, a representative appointed by the Sheriff's Association. So these three highlighted ones are still in discussion, and so perhaps we can talk a little bit more about today. But a representative appointed by the State Ambulance Association, a representative appointed by the Department of Health EMS Advisory Committee, a representative appointed by the Department of Health, and two representatives appointed by the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, one rural and one urban. This was the draft recommendation for the composition of the board. The next slide really talks about a preliminary budget. So if you want to talk about the composition, we can do that now, or I could just mention, go down a little further. You want to discuss now, Dan, or you want me to finish up?
No, keep going.
All right. So a draft budget, for potential governance staff and logistics and budget needs. And so, this is a draft recommendation for the government. So board membership, compensation expenses, follow the Act guidelines for task force members, $150 a day, assume for a per diem, assume one meeting per month. And so here's what that budget would be. A subcommittee membership, again, per diem for those not otherwise compensated by their employer, and expenses, estimated at $25,000 a year. Administrative staffing, one full-time executive leader to guide all aspects of the program, and two senior administrative liaison staff, estimated at $350,000 a year. A fiscal agent or fiscal support from another department, which is how the E911 board is provided this support, $50,000 a year. Office space and facilities, technology needs required, $40,000 a year. Meeting facilities we look at that as not being expense. So we would meet. The meetings would be held virtually at different locations throughout the state. And then other expenses, legal, $30,000 a year, professional services, consulting, $50,000 a year, for an estimated budget of $570,000 a year. Any questions? All right, so this is the final slide here, and again, the goal here would be to develop a charter, bylaws anchored on the recommendations as developed by SAFECOM within the best practices for their governance charter, and these are the key elements in the definitions and referencing this best practices for governance charters. A charter would be developed to guide the work of the governance board and associated committees. And so I think a decision whether or not we develop a draft bylaws prior to and provide it to the legislature is probably a discussion topic. But that's the last slide regarding governance. And so open discussion is appropriate.
It just seems very redundant to me. It feels like we're using the same set of resources for a very similar purpose. Perhaps I need to sit with Barb and sort of have a better understanding of sort of the mission statement of 911 versus the mission statement here. Maybe I'm just not in the weeds enough to understand that fully, but looking at this, I go, we're spending a lot of dough for two committees composed of primarily the same people with to me at least, very similar outcomes and workaday objectives.
Can I make a comment on that real quick? I
Sure.
don't disagree with you that there's a lot of redundancy here. And we struggled with this in our governance meetings a lot, is how much overlap there is here. But we kept coming back to, and Barb and Paul probably can elaborate on this a little bit, but we kept coming back to the fact that while there is overlap and there are these two, 911 and regional dispatch look to be similar here, we have a mandate to come up with a structure legislatively that works. We could say just copy paste this, but we still don't even know what the output will be at the end of the day, because we're still working on those recommendations. So I don't mean to be super vague, Dan. I'm saying we struggled with the exact same concerns, right? We went through the exact same process, but we kept going back to what was mandated by the legislature, the mission that we're trying to achieve, the fact that we can't just make this a state-run thing because that's not what we've been asked to do, right? We need to look at everything. So that's where I think you're struggling with the same thing we did, I guess is what I'm saying. And yeah, probably a good conversation with Barb will help clear some of that up. But I see exactly your concerns too.
The question that I would ask is, why would a merger of those two entities be a bad thing? And again, I don't know, you don't have to explain that to me now, but in order to get behind these two entities, I'd want to know what's wrong with this. Why couldn't we just say, and by the way, I'm not lobbying in one direction or the other. Why couldn't we say the 911 board is now the Public Safety Communications Board and incorporates all of its current activities plus, and then, give them additional staff or give them additional resources that are necessary to do that job. It just seems like we're spending money on buildings and staff and legal and all this stuff that essentially is kind of doing and working on the same side of the street, at least.
Right. I guess I'll echo what Mike said. We did struggle with this. I'm still struggling with it. But I hear your concerns. My job is to protect the integrity of the statewide 911 system. And that's why I'm so adamant about there being a distinction here, at least in the beginning, right? There's a lot at stake here. The membership too, I just wanted to point out of this proposed governance model is greatly expanded from the existing 9-member 911 board. So it kind of blends, in my view, the 911 board structure, some of it, and the Emergency Communications Advisory Council that was created by executive order but has never become active, right? To me, it's kind of a combination of those two things. So anyway, just a little bit additional insight on that. It sounds to me like we need to let these recommendations and this discussion kind of percolate for a little while, and maybe have those offline conversations, Dan, to see where the task force wants to go with that.
I think
just like
to
to
the
add-
other, sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to add, go back in history a little bit here, back to the formation of the Enhanced 911 Board years ago. At that point in time, there was a lot of pushback from the dispatch side for 911 board not to have any control over the dispatch side. I know that there's still some of that sentiment out there today. I don't believe that there's a problem as far as what some people still out there may think. But there was that pushback years ago to keep those two functions separate. I think to get buy-in today, you might start with two separate boards and eventually merge together. That's what I envision probably being the least of all the evils. for something.
Yeah, and I'm not necessarily lobbying one direction or the other here. I
Neither am
agree.
I.
I think there will be some pushback here from another, and I don't. Yeah, the other lingering hitch in my giddy up here is, so when we think about that phrase decision-making capability, right? I mean, I think at heart, whatever governance we're putting here has to be able to get stuff done. And I'm just seeing here like a very unclear capability to do that, that this is sort of like centralized, but not really centralized. It's sort of running parallel to a bunch of other players. I think the structure, as I see, is really going to struggle with the ability to say, hey, we're doing it this way, even though you might be unhappy about that.
So I wonder if the wording decision-making authority is what's hanging this up a little bit, right? Like, what exactly do we mean by that? We mean the ability to establish rules, the ability to establish the technical and operational standards, or is it something different than that?
Well,
I look at the decision-making authority as being, as you say, the technical and operational standards. That's how I look at it. Training requirements, so forth.
Right. If there were like a pot of money that went along with this work, and I don't know if that is even such a thing, but let's say there were funds that could be distributed or grants or whatever. I think that's what I was thinking in terms of that this entity would have the ability to make decisions about things like that, grant funds or grant programs or what have you. That's a good question, though.
I don't look at it as the decision-making authority as being much different than 911. 911 spells out what the hardware requirements are, software requirements, training standards, procedures, policies, procedures. I see that this board would have that same decision-making authority. That's kind of where I'm coming from looking at it. Because if you roll it into 911, that's what you're going to be doing there too, regardless of whether you have two separate boards or one. My question that I have as relating to the decision-making authority goes to how do we deal with the out-of-state agencies?
Right.
And I know that was a discussion in the governance group.
Right, and we didn't come up with any answers on that, right?
No, I didn't. I was looking for that to see if you had any.
No. Although I'm not sure which working group it was, but there was some discussion about the very valid point, in my view anyway, that out-of-state dispatch agencies that are serving Vermont communities have invested money in infrastructure to support that effort, and that that needs to be considered. I don't know, that's an important, that hit home when I heard the out-of-state person comment on that, and they've been doing it for decades. So
yes.
So Jim, I think we did discuss this a number of times, and one of the conversations was that the out-of-state centers would also adopt our procedures, policies, and certifications to the extent possible. But we think if we establish them internal to the state, our external partners either have similar or could adopt our practices so that we're common across the board. That was part of the discussion. We can't mandate it, but recommendations we based on the quality of what we're receiving from out-of-state support. And Barb and I did meet with the New Hampshire representative, and so the goal there is that they should consider and adopt our policies.
Well, of
I
course we can
don't have a
mandate
problem.
it. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. If we establish a state standard in Vermont and an entity delivers service to Vermont actors, why wouldn't they have to follow our standard?
We wouldn't have any authority on an out-of-state entity.
Well,
But isn't
we
that
would
the whole
have-
point of
Necessarily,
creating
sure.
a governance board, to be able to establish that authority?
So I don't think that's necessarily true, Barb, because if we take a step back and say that somewhere in the picture, this whole effort involves some funding for that dispatching, then what happens is,
Hmm.
from my perspective, is for an agency or community to be able to access that money, then the dispatching entity that they're giving that money to needs to adhere to the standards to qualify. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
so either they
And-
qualify, or the entity, the agency or the community has to pony up the money out of their own pocket because they're not using a compliant facility.
And I'll add that I'm not saying that we would do this without talking to them or including them in these conversations on how we build these standards. But I mean, there's plenty of examples in the world of EMS. We have lots of EMS agencies that take care of patients in Vermont, but when they come to Vermont, they adhere to the standards that we've created. I mean, if we're creating standards and saying, well, you can adhere to them if you like, but if you don't want to, we don't care. Well, that's not a standard. That's a
right,
guideline at best.
right. I
And
see
that
what
doesn't
you're
make any
saying.
sense to me at all.
Interesting. Phil, I see your hand is up. Did you want to add something?
I would just build on that comment, just to say, I thought of like another example that comes to mind is for things like CGIS access. If there's a dispatch center in New Hampshire that is going to have access to the CGIS network in Vermont, they have to comply with all the same security requirements that a Vermont agency does. There are several other instances, I would agree, if that you are subject to the rules and regulations of the state that you are providing the service in.
I'd also like to say that, if we're going to establish standards, not being one personally to be a really, really big on reinventing the wheel and doing things like my own way without asking other people who have been successful doing the same task, how they do it. If we were to look at what is being done by those out-of-state agencies, we might be able to construct our standards such that it's not a really big ask for them to comply.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Ron. That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. As long
just
as
seems
the
like
end, so
this-
the end result is that the customer, if you will, in Vermont, whether that's a response agency or frankly, it's the public, right, gets the same or an equivalent level of service is the goal.
Yes, I agree. I think that's very true, Barb. I think as we sort of look at this and we look at governance here, I think there's a piece of the objective that is, how do we build a system that has authority? And I'm very cognizant of the need for local control and existing structure and all that. But aren't we envisioning the next step? Aren't we envisioning what it should look like, not just how we've always done it and make sure you do it that way? I think part of this process is how we've always done it isn't working the best way. What's the best way to do it? And I don't know, what I'm seeing here is a lot of kind of like, well, this is how we've always done it.
Interesting. There's been a vacuum though in the dispatch world for this type of, I'll call it state level standard setting, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure I agree that this is how we've always done it on the dispatch side.
I don't mean necessarily like technically. I mean sort of philosophically. That the philosophy of we're going to keep everything very regional, very sort of like if you want to do that over there, it's okay, but we'll do it differently over here. I don't know. When I look at this, I think our vision ought to be how do we, and I get we can't centralize everything, and I get we can't have just sort of one dictatorial, committee or the, but I think there is a place to say we want Vermont standards. We want unifying standards that are universal, regardless of whether you're coming from New Hampshire or coming from a different part of Vermont. I think there are some of those places that we need this governance to have authority to be able to say that's how we do it here.
I think that there are a couple of factors. The people that are most likely to complain. I mean, we've had some reasonable participation in our meetings from the dispatch community. But the people who are most likely to complain that we've always done it this way, why can't we continue to do it that way, is the first responder community. And I have to say that the participation from the first responder community, whether it's fire, police, or EMS, has been pretty minimal at best. And so, when we're giving them an opportunity to participate in developing these standards and giving us their opinions, they don't show up. They're only going to show up to complain that we didn't do it their way. In the conversations that I have had, the people who are using the least compliant, if we look at the dispatch centers that we have now, most of them are pretty mainstream. And then there's a few outliers, real small ones that only dispatch a few agencies and things. And the vast majority of agencies that are being dispatched by those facilities are driven by two ideologies. First one is this weird concept that if a dispatcher isn't within a certain number of miles from me, they can't possibly know what I'm up to and be able to dispatch me. Yeah. And the other one is we just want to do it the cheapest way possible. Like, we don't want to pay any more money, so we're going to the cheapest possible dispatch facility. And that's great, but I think that they have to understand that whatever they do, if the state adopts standards for dispatching and they take their minimal dollars and their weird ideas and they go to a dispatch facility that doesn't comply to those standards, that opens up a lot of legal liability for them when something happens and it's traced back to problems in dispatching and things like that. Because lawyers are always looking for that kind of stuff. So I think that, creating standards that the vast majority of our dispatch centers are willing to comply with, the other people are really going to be kind of sucked into the slipstream, because if they don't comply, there are problems with that.
All right. I think we should let this percolate some more. One thing I would add, Dan, as far as the thought of the redundancy that you mentioned in the two groups, I think we actually need to have input from the 911 board itself, right? Not just me as executive director. We do have a 911 board meeting on October 14th that you're going to join me at, Dan. Mm-hmm. And we are also going to invite Televate to help us sort through all of the work of the working groups. So I'm sure that they would have input on the merging of the two entities or of the work. Anyway, I that might be where we leave it for now and get input from the 911 board and then revisit the discussion. Does that make sense?
Barb, before we ban it, can I just add one more comment, please?
Sure.
For Dan and Jim and Ron's input. So there was a really good discussion during one of the sessions where we looked at, how do we, we can create policies and standards, but how do we implement them? What are the requirements? And I think this will work both at the regional level as well as neighboring state level. So, we create these policies. We can't, we say you have 3 years to comply with them. And so you're given a period of time. Here's the standards, and here's here's the time frame, and here's what we're going to do to help you achieve these objectives, whether training, certification, and otherwise, so that we are establishing standards, policies, and procedures that would create a common service environment, and again for the future funding group of a similar cost structure across the board. And the question came back, well, what additional incentives can we provide? So in order to achieve these objectives, what are the benefits? And as Ron has pointed out many times, there isn't an ongoing body of statewide communication level, let's say at the radio level. I mean, we don't have committees statewide. We have regional, we have silos. And so the goal here would be to create an environment where both, that would inspire, encourage, facilitate regional and statewide efforts. And so, that was, kind of the objective is not only to help govern and create policies and procedures that are in the best interest of all of the statewide community and the citizens, but also to provide a forum where we can have these ongoing discussions at these key committee level.
Okay, anything more on this right now? Emily, I'm hoping maybe you can make a note to keep the governance recommendations discussion on the agenda for the next meeting, so we can continue at that point. If we're ready, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Okay, so the next agenda item is the Vermont League of Cities and Towns Needs Assessment. So Act 78 had a requirement that the task force, I'm going to quote from the language of the bill, with the assistance of the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, conduct a needs assessment to determine where and to what extent there are gaps in dispatch service or significant challenges to the delivery of dispatch service. And as Rick and Dom were putting together the presentation for the Joint Fiscal Committee, they noted that this work, we really hadn't addressed this component thoroughly. So we did receive initial input from the VLCT during the stakeholder workshops early on in the work. And the discussion came up of what more do we need to do to meet this requirement. So this conversation originated, I think, in the governance working group most recently. And the thought was that excuse me just a minute, I need to shut my door, 1 minute. All right, apologies for that. So in the working group, we talked about having the task force make a decision about a particular course of action. So the thought was we would ask Televate to develop some sort of survey or outreach mechanism that would get this information from the various communities in the town, and that we ask the Vermont League of Cities and Towns to help us engage with each municipality, maybe by sending out or introducing the survey, or just communicating it to their membership. So, Rick, I think I've summarized that pretty well. That's where we left it, right?
Yes, we did. We also talked about representing, a task force representative or someone from Televate supporting Mike at an upcoming town fair that the league is also sponsoring on October 8th.
That's right. Okay, yes, I forgot that piece. So because these is like directing work of Televate, right? We wanted to make sure we had the task force approval to, ask Televate to develop this outreach tool or survey, do the work with VLCT, and also have a presence at that town fair on October 8th, which would be a good opportunity to engage with nearly every municipality in the state. So thoughts from task force members on whether that's a good idea? Is that something you would approve?
Make a motion,
Sure, Jim, go ahead.
make a motion to have Televate develop the assessment and attend the Vermont Leagues of Cities and Towns conference.
Okay, is there a second?
I will second that motion.
Thank you, Ron. Any more discussion? All right, then, all in favor of asking Televate to develop the survey and attend the town fair on October 8th, raise your hand or indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Excellent. I see Dan, Jim, and my hand is up, and I heard ayes from Mike and Ron. So you're good to go on that. Rick, do you need anything else right now as far as information for developing that survey?
No, not directly, but I may reach out. I'm certainly going to reach out to Mike and to yourself. We'll put a draft survey together to ensure that, it goes through a review process and gets enhanced so that and of course we're going to need some support also from Mike to get input from the league on how they would prefer to do it, particularly hosting the survey. We're going to do electronic survey, so I could have a conversation with Mike and or yourself or other members of the task force in preparing the survey.
Excellent. Okay, that sounds good then. All right. Next on the agenda, we have executive session if needed. It is not needed today. So we'll move on to new business. Does anyone have any new business for today? Okay, hearing nothing. We're at public comment, and we did have at least one other person join us. So, Irene Renner, Senator Renner, go ahead. Do you have anything to add today?
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Second what Dan said about preventing redundancy, that really resonated with me. My main concern would be how best and how quickly to fill the dead zones. And I don't know if that's something that the E911 board would want to work on, and therefore that they would be the best organization to, because they've got that data and they may not want to share it with a second board. Just good food for thought. So thanks to Dan for bringing that up.
Great, thank you. Chris Pedotti, do you have any comment today?
No, Barb, I don't, but thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
All right. And Phil, I'll go back to you. I mean, you contributed along the way a little bit here, but anything further you'd like to add?
No, not at this time. Thank you, though.
Okay, I think I got everybody covered for an opportunity. All right, so next on the agenda is to confirm the next meeting date. We are on the books for October 8th. And with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Thank
Second.
you, Ron. Thank you, Jim. All in favor of adjourning for today, raise your hand or signify by saying aye.
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 All right, I hear 2 ayes and I see 3 hands, and we are adjourned. So thank you, everybody, for being here today and all the work on the working groups, and we'll talk again very soon.
Thank you, Barb. Thank you, everyone.
All right,
Bye.
take care.
Thanks so much.